Discussion of zoning and code amendments. With Liz and Lisa. Yeah, you're good.
So we have no hats tonight, Mayor. My apologies. I did not know it was a dress-up party. No one sent me an invitation. But you never know what we'll pull out at adoption. We might have to do something to celebrate. So Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council, I am joined here tonight by Lisa Greeter and Ian Croson. And they are going to provide us with further information on the comprehensive plan and also starting to move into Ambon Boulevard Park. So I am going to pass it over to Lisa. Thank you.
And good evening. So we were going to cover some background on housing opportunities and needs that helped us work with the advisory committee and the planning commission on the future land use map and zoning map and the associated policies. And then we will talk more specifically about those two maps and then some incentives for development that is consistent with the city's plan. And that would be the planned action ordinances that facilitate permits and also the multifamily tax exemption that we've talked a little bit about in prior meetings. So first I'm going to have Ian share some background on some of the changes to housing laws that occurred that also drove some of the work that we did with the city.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Good evening. So yes, the Washington State Legislature has been very active in housing legislation for the last number of years. And these laws set the stage for the comprehensive plan update. There's quite a few at play. Some of the big ones here are on the slide. 1220 was passed way back in 2021 and really kind of fundamentally changed how cities do this comprehensive planning process, especially in the area of housing. It requires inventory and analysis of housing needs by income, and with an emphasis on permanent supportive housing and emergency housing. You may have heard the acronym STEP. I think that's where this comes from. It requires cities to identify sufficient capacity for those housing needs, make sure there's adequate provisions, identify barriers, and also address any historic or ongoing racially disparate impacts. So that's been a big part of the comprehensive plan process from the beginning, and I think Burke has done a great job, Lisa's firm, at really thinking through how that's going to just all the way through the process of making this plan work. There's also some other updates that we're working on with staff and will also be needed to implemented within the next year, having to do with accessory dwelling units, 1337. Burien is already actually pretty close to compliance with that one because you have a pretty progressive accessory dwelling unit rules on the books. Burien was leader in that. Then the middle housing, which is required to be implemented in all residential zones by June of next year. And that work there was some progress on that last year, but there is still work to be done on middle housing.
Thank you, Ian. So we're going to do a little bit of background on the HB 1220 requirements that led to some of the evaluation of the current zoning, and then Ian will come back and address some of the approach to middle housing. If I can get this to go. Oh, wow. It went a lot further than we had hoped. Okay. Maybe you try it.
All right, okay.
There we go. This slide is showing a few different things. At the top there with the map with the red dots, it's showing areas that I think between the 1920s and the 40s, there were covenants that restricted different racial groups from owning property in Burien, and that's not unusual in the region. King County has a database for the whole county. So we took a look at that information as part of the background. We also looked at the original King County zoning from the 1930s, and until Burien incorporated, this area was largely single family in zoning and character. And then over the years, the city largely carried forward the zoning from King County with some changes, and there were some areas of down zones, meaning less density in some areas, like on the areas certainly with landslides, but also other areas of the city, like around Lake Burien. But there were also up zones around downtown, and that changed the development type and allowed some greater diversity in housing. And then South King County as a whole became an area known for affordable, close-in housing to job centers like Seattle. And so a lot of folks moved south, including into Burien, and the area became more diverse. And what we were seeing in some of our research was that Burien started to become less affordable because a lot of people found it an attractive place to live, and housing prices were going up all over the region. Partly, the state has found that over 1 million housing units, that the state is undersupplied by about 1 million housing units. So Burien is just one small part of that, but that's part of the reason for some of the changes in the laws that Ian referred to. So in addition to looking at history, we looked at today's conditions in terms of access to homeownership opportunities. And in terms of households that had were more likely to have single-family ownership housing included people that are white or Asian, and less so for other racial groups, more likely to rent and not own. The poverty rates tend to be higher, and the evictions greater for some of those other groups. So part of the law is asking us to look at the conditions, but then also what could be done. So we did speak to a number of folks through different events about their experiences on eviction or rising prices or gentrification. And we did hear from a number of people about that they rent in Burien and they would love to own here, but they can't afford to live here. To other folks who found this was my first home here in Burien, but I see the affordability isn't what it once was, and offering ideas for where to put some additional middle housing or more attached housing, such as intersections and nodes near transit, were some of the ideas that we heard about during the engagement. And there was community-wide engagement, but also with Southwest Youth and Family Services and Para los Niños doing focus groups to talk through some of these topic areas. Yeah, try you.
Sure.
Mind.
And I
Sorry.
think the community,
Oh, there we go.
the community connectors who were mentioned in the proclamation
sure.
tonight were played a big role in the advisory groups as well.
Thank you. This map here in red is showing areas of displacement risk, and that would be due to social vulnerability. So people of lower income, gentrification, changing housing costs. That's a look over a 10-year period. And so much of Burien is shown as having displacement risk. Downtown is in the yellow there. But this is residential, so there may be business displacement risk, but this is about residential, and less so as you go further west. In addition to looking at conditions, we looked at policies and looked at ways to strengthen policies in the element around protecting what we were calling naturally occurring affordable housing. It is affordable today because of the time frame it was built and the size of the units, and it still is affordable. So taking great care with areas of zoning changes because of that potential for displacement risk. Adding missing middle housing to single family zones, that's required in the law now. It also was a recommendation in your housing action plan that was done a few years ago. And then increasing some effectiveness and allowing more housing, so getting that additional supply. Part of the strategy was consolidating low-density residential designations on the future land use map and consolidating the commercial and mixed-use areas to both simplify the plan and make it easier to develop the housing types that are needed to meet your housing targets. And so that brings us back from the analytics side back to some of the recommendations that ended up in the plan around the future land use map and zoning. So Ian's going to pick it up from here.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so some of the biggest pieces of the comprehensive plan update are changes to land use designations, thinking about the vision for different parts of the city in terms of what kinds of buildings and uses, activities, homes, jobs happen in different areas, and then the zoning that regulates that and is one of the and not the only, but one of the implementation tools for what is allowed to be built, what is encouraged to be built in different areas. One of the really standout features of the current zoning map in Burien, something that was a big topic of the work that Lisa mentioned, looking into racially disparate impacts, is that there's really the large majority of Burien, you're only allowed to build a house on a lot, which is one of the more exclusive housing types that there is. There's middle housing is allowed. Currently, middle housing referring to small buildings with a few units, not one unit and not 100 units, just with a handful of units. Currently allowed in just a few areas in the city. You can see in the map on the right there. In those orange areas, in apartment buildings, also restricted to just a small area of the city. That there'll be changes to allow middle housing in those yellow areas, which we referenced on the slide about the housing laws that city has to implement. And one of those is that I didn't read the bullets off there, but there'll be 2 units. The state requires Burien to allow 2 units on every residential lot and 4 units within a quarter mile of frequent transit. So basically, which would be the rapid ride H and F lines here. And that is part of the comprehensive plan. The zoning for that is still to come. There's also, and that is part of the future land use map, which you can see there on the left. They're different colors, represent very generalized categories or rough intensities of land use. Your residential low, your residential medium, your downtown areas, and mixed use zones. The outcome of this future land use map started. Well, it builds off of the current comprehensive plan map, which hasn't changed much in the last few decades. And one of the areas where the biggest changes are in this map are in the Ambaum and Boulevard Park sub areas. And so this is building off of incorporating the recommendations from that planning process, which got underway way back in 2021. And I believe will be adopted hopefully along with the comprehensive plan. And some the Planning Commission also identified that there are some really promising conditions along First Avenue where there's pretty frequent transit. It's not quite rapid ride, but buses run down there pretty often. The city's going to invest in sidewalks, improve streetscape. There's businesses. A lot of the work with the advisory committee and in community engagement and especially coming out of the pandemic was thinking about neighborhood centers and places where areas around the city where you can go to interact with your neighbors and maybe buy a cup of coffee or have some kind of do something that's not just living in a house. So little areas of activity and areas of community scattered throughout the city. And First Avenue was kind of identified to have some potential nodes there at 136th and 128th to kind of build off of for that. So that's the future land use map. There's at the same time, Makers, my firm, the firm that I work for, is working with staff on a new suite, an updated suite of zoning to help implement the changes to the land use map, which would modernize and streamline the zoning in those areas, try to make it easier to implement, more flexible, try to make sure we're not making things illegal that are things that we actually want. And so the map highlights those places where that new suite of zones would come into effect, and those are the more higher density areas, the mixed use and the higher density residential zones. And then the zoning in the gray area of the map, much of that will be updated with the middle housing work that is to be done, and then some other areas, industrial zones, the current zoning will remain in place. There's also a few little changes flagged there you can see in the map on the right from what was recommended by the Planning Commission, where we identified there are little changes that need to be made for consistency with what's the rules on the ground today.
I think one other thing to mention is that the plan sets the vision for different land uses necessary to meet community needs, housing and jobs, and parks and so on. But it is not the only thing that guides what happens on a property. Zoning certainly does. It's more detailed than the future land use map. But in addition, there would be critical area regulations. The Shoreline Master Program provides sort of an overlay on top of zoning. So those other regulations that the city has on the books will continue to apply. In addition to these, we're just setting the foundation for the growth that the city expects over the next 20 years.
Thanks. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, it worked. Some of the policies that are in the draft housing element that we presented back in early August, I think August 5th, do include a couple of incentives. The policy on the top there talks about removing barriers to development of affordable and market rate housing using creative SEPA tools, State Environmental Policy Act tools. That would be changes to exemption levels or infill or planned actions, and we'll be talking about the planned actions this evening. The second policy there is to update the city's multifamily tax exemption code, and that was a recommendation in your housing action plan. So this is a way to capture some of the recommendations from other studies, but also then to show how things could be implemented. The state is asking the city to not only develop the new plan, but to remove barriers to housing. And so one of the big areas of focus is zoning that Ian described. But some other areas are that the city could pursue some incentives to facilitate the desired growth. One of those is a planned action process, and this diagram is showing from left to right, establishing a planned action area, a boundary where the homework and the environmental impact statement is identified, that future growth and what the natural and built environment implications are. And once the environmental impact statement is completed, then to adopt an ordinance, and we have some drafts in your packet, that would make it easier if you are within the bounds of the analysis. So there's a certain amount of growth that was studied, there's mitigation in terms of transportation or stormwater, that sort of thing. So what it does is it gives sort of a transparency for the community and the developer, saying these are the rules. If you're fitting within this level of growth and you provide these mitigation, you don't need to redo the analysis. You can basically use the analysis that was done. And so the benefits are that you can kind of look at the cumulative effects in this environmental impact statement upfront altogether, whereas permits by permits, it's just taking that one site. And the city can anticipate ahead of time what the impacts are and result in a more streamlined process and at this permitting stage. So again, there's more certainty and more transparency, but the rules are written, and so they, in addition to the Burien Municipal Code, they have to follow these ordinances. And so the contents of the ordinance are to have procedures and criteria. So, you know, following the mitigation measures, there's monitoring. So the city would look at it every few years, make sure that it's being implemented as designed. And so then it has the boundaries of the area and the mitigation measures that go with each. And the city did do one in the past for the Northeast redevelopment area, the NARA area in 2009. So these would be new ones. One for the urban center on the greater downtown rather. It takes in the urban center and it goes up First Avenue. Like Ian was mentioning, the Planning Commission was interested in those areas, and those areas were studied for greater heights and intensities in the environmental impact statement. And then on the right-hand side with the gray, on the left is Ambom corridor, and on the right is Boulevard Park. And those were studied in their own environmental impact statement a couple of years ago. And so they would also have their own ordinance with the mitigation measures unique to that area. So we'll show a couple of examples of the mitigation. So on the left-hand column, it's talking about transportation and that the development has to implement the street frontage standards that are from that Ambom Boulevard Park plan. Outdoor space noise mitigation. So if they provide an outdoor plaza or park, they need to try to design it in such a way that it reduces the potential exposure to air pollution and noise. And then stormwater, the city had done some focused review in some of its stormwater planning for some areas of flooding in Boulevard Park. And so this ordinance would say the development needs to respect that, provide some additional review of those sites because they're not on a critical area map, but they've been identified as potential areas of concern. So this would add on top of the critical areas and say, this is an area of concern, you need to do some additional review at a site-specific level. Those are just examples. There's some additional sets of standards for the downtown, the urban center, greater downtown. So that's the planned action. That's one set of incentives. People do not have to use those incentives, but they tend to use them because it does facilitate the permit process. Otherwise, they have to do some of their own review. The multifamily tax exemption, we talked about a little bit. This proposed set of changes is responding to a different law that changed in 2021, again, to make housing more facilitated in the marketplace through tax exemption for certain periods of time. So there were some changes in the law, and there's now a 20-year multifamily tax exemption, not just an 8 and 12-year for permanent affordability. There can be extensions to existing properties that have the multifamily tax exemption. There's more auditing requirements and things of that nature that are captured in the code amendments. So the applicability, the council saw this map, I think, on your August 19th meeting. So the hatched areas with the dark lines match the zoning that Ian described, the mixed use and multifamily areas. And so those were the areas the Planning Commission felt that the Housing Action Plan recommendation to extend the multifamily tax exemption from downtown to Ambom and Boulevard Park was a good idea, but also wanted that opportunity for other mixed use and multifamily areas. So now it would apply on the First Avenue and some of the other areas that Ian described. So I will turn it back to Liz to speak to the schedule refinements. Yeah.
So we took a hard look at our schedule and have built in a little bit of extra time for some public engagement. So we are here tonight on September 9th, where we were talking about planned action ordinance, MFTE, and zoning. On the 23rd, we will be back for the open house, where we will have boards set up outside of council chambers, and we will be available to meet with members of the public that would like to, understand more about what this means for them. So we'll set those up. We will also have the hearing for the MFTE on the 23rd. So that will be an opportunity for the public to give council their thoughts on the MFTE specifically. On the 30th, we'll come back and we'll have more discussion about the mixed use and multifamily zoning code. And that will apply to both the urban core and the Ambon Boulevard Park areas. And then on the 7th, we will have yet another hearing. And that hearing will actually be for the comprehensive plan, but it will be for all of the elements of the comprehensive plan, including the transportation master plan, the sub-area plans, and the planned action ordinances. We will then hop back to Ambon Boulevard Park on the 21st of October and talk more about the mixed use and multifamily design guidelines. And those will help round out the zoning that we talk about, understanding what can be built and how we are going to be looking at it from a design perspective. Then we will look for adoption of the comprehensive plan, the sub-area plans, the transportation master plan, the MFTE and planned action ordinances in one big bundle on October 28th. One more hearing on November 4th, and that will be a hearing for the mixed use and multifamily zoning and design guidelines. And then we're looking for adoption on November 18th. And that would adopt the mixed use multifamily zoning and design guidelines. So we would have all of these pieces rolled up together, which sounds pretty fabulous. And we definitely need hats for that event. I think that is our presentation for tonight. So we are available for any questions.
Well, first of all, let me say, I continue to be impressed and happy with the direction we're going with this. I think that we're showcasing what cities the size of Burien can do to play our part in the regional needs around housing, but also to find ways that are creative to do it, that understand the public-private partnership relationship here, that the city needs to partner positively with the people who are actually going to be building the housing and find ways to make it faster and cheaper. So I'm super excited to see a reduction of permitting times being on there. I've been saying I want that for years. And so I'm really, really happy to see that. I think this plan recognizes both the importance of supply and demand. So we're focusing on expanding tax incentives as well as supply side changes to tackle both the supply and demand elements of needs around not just Burien, but the region. And I think our expansion of the map to incorporate every state law change around density is really, really important to show we're serious about it, but that hopefully other cities will be just as serious about it as we are. And we have some specific targets that we're doing well meeting, but I think this is just gonna say to the developer community, to the home building community, we want you here in Burien. We recognize this is a time where we're trying to reduce costs, we're trying to reduce times as it's getting built. I'm just really happy to see this plan come together. It's fantastic. Anyone else want to say anything? Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Garcia.
Mayor, I'll echo excitement that you shared. Totally. This is great. It's a lot of work. So thank you for all the hours on both ends, and then staff and our consultant. Just two questions. One, with the beginning of the presentation, there was a slide where you showed like when we got annexed, and I think it said something around 1993 and 1998, and that there was a downzoning. Can you confirm for me that at that time, the council, what does that mean? What happened with that downsizing? Then how are we paying for it now?
Yes, Councilmember, we can provide more information, but it was around 2013. And there used to be a zone, I believe, that was a 9,600 square foot lot zone. So you had a 7,200 square foot lot zone, a 9,600 and a 12,000.
Gotcha.
So I believe a lot of the 9,600 square foot lots became 12,000 square foot lots. So that lowered the density on those properties.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to confirm that, and in essence, kind of share with the public more than anything. I think what's important with everything that you're doing is that we really understand. A lot of us are prior commissioners, talk with developers, but I think it's gonna be important for, especially the open house, as to why, so that the average person coming in wanting to find out whether they hear rumors that, hey, now I'm gonna have a lot of big buildings in my backyard, what's going on? I think it's important for that clarity to be known to the general public. Because there's gonna be a lot of rumors, a lot of concerns, anytime there's change, right? But we have changed, and the change is coming, and it will continue to come. Right now, we're living through some of those hard changes, because previously, councils 15 years ago didn't think maybe that we'd grow so fast, so much, right? So I think it's really important. It's probably gonna be, in my opinion, the most important decision that my tenure on this 4 years of councils will do, because it will impact the next 20 years. So I think conveying that in a way that makes sense so that people understand why we're doing this, like why, like, because I'm hearing pushback, whether it's emails, social media posts, like, why do you guys do this? Why do you do this? But I mean, I think it's important for us to simplify that answer so that when we do it, we can be concise into explaining why we're doing it and thinking far ahead in the future. That was just one comment. One thing I'd like to find out more is, you mentioned a suite of recommendations for improving what the mayor said, affordability for processing, permitting. Can you just, for whenever we get to that point, can you include any recommendations on the number of staffing needed for us to apply those tools appropriately? Because you can have all the great tools and suites, but if we don't have the right level of staffing, it's pointless. Our permitting is not gonna improve. So understanding how to best prepare that, because we do have a big budget and we do have a big potential safety levy discussion. So I think understanding what our staffing needs for this particular comprehensive plan is gonna be very important for me, and I'm sure the rest of the council. Not now, but for whenever we get to.
I can begin to address it, Councilmember, and thank you for the question. I think a lot of times that gets lost, that all of these great plans and ideas need people to help implement, especially around permit review. And so one of the areas where we're going to see immediate benefit, as Ian was mentioned, is through the planned action ordinance, where people don't have to do their own analysis for their projects for the environmental review. So you would kind of did it for them, and then they get to piggyback on that and just take those recommendations that are in the planned action ordinance and utilize those to move their project forward. So I think that's one, kind of immediate win. The other part is around some of the new zoning ordinances, I think, are going to be easier to implement and easier for people to understand. That is going to be another area where we certainly will have some. But, historically, we always need more staff, and especially as a council, you have an enormous appetite for good ideas and moving things forward, which is really fun, but it also takes staffing needs. So we are looking at that as we look at the proposed budget, moving forward. But I think there's always going to be a place for more staffing. And you mentioned the public safety. That is a component of this, because all of these permitting issues have a really big and immediate impact on public safety. And so trying to make those ties as well, we're working on that also. So I know that wasn't a specific, I need 2 more people, but we're playing around with all of it and kind of trying to think ahead.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. Very thoughtful.
Thank you so much for that presentation. And I just had a good idea, one of those council good ideas. Which, just looking at the map, and I guess my question was, how do we involve Metro and schools? Because I'm looking at what I know best, which is the neighborhood where I live, Boulevard Park, and saying we're going to have more density there, and really not a lot of transportation to the places where there's, the east-west transportation, which has always been kind of the shortfall. How do I get from my area in the east part of Burien, just down 128th to where all the good things are on First Avenue and on Ambaum. And I would like to see, as we talk about growth, that we bring our growth plans to, you know, some of those partners and let them know this is where the density is probably going to be. How are the people there going to get around? Yeah, and the same thing, you know, I'm seeing my neighborhood projected to grow just after an elementary school closed, and I'm thinking, I wonder what that's gonna, you know, what will happen next? Curious. And the other question was a question which is on the September 20th or 23rd public hearing listening session outside of here. Is that something that council can attend as listeners? And if so, is there a way that we'll be able to sign up to avoid all of us being there at the same time?
I will probably defer to our city attorney, but it is an open house. So again, I'll defer, but I believe that if you are not combining together during that event, it would be fine, even if you were in the same room. But I think we could have city attorney weigh in on that.
Again, as I think you would recall, we've indicated that you're able by statute to be in the same place as long as you're not actually engaging in council business. So I know some people just immediately look and say there's a quorum, therefore they're some sort of violation. That's not actually what the RCW says. But obviously you have to be careful. You can't go and actually engage in conducting city business. But you're all present, watching, listening. Okay. But it again is probably best for us to kind of understand who's doing what and kind of making sure that we don't do something or council members don't do something that could be misinterpreted, because that sometimes happens.
I did briefly want to address also your other comments on the coordination. That's something that we are working on and kind of learning as we go. But we do have a lot of contacts over at the school district, and have regular planning meetings with them for a lot of their planning as they're informing us, and then we're trying to inform them. We were even fortunate enough to have a representative come to a planning commission meeting when we were talking about this. So certainly trying to build those relationships so that we can share information. The other area where we are building those relationships is with our surrounding jurisdictions. So I'm starting to meet with the other planning directors for Des Moines, Normandy Park. We're going to be doing quarterly meetings so that we can try and, kind of grow that as well, just at the ground level. So I think that importance is huge, and I appreciate that you're thinking about that.
That is great to hear. Also CTAC.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll see you next meeting. Thank you. Okay, city council planning calendar. Does any council member have something to add to the council agenda? Deputy Mayor Mora?
I wanted to see if anyone else was wanting to add this to the calendar, or so show of thumbs up. Options to address predatory corporate home buying.
Predatory corporate home buying.
Sorry, I wanted options to address predatory home buying, corporate home buying. We have a lot of companies that are wanting to take up housing when a small house is for sale, and I wanted to keep housing as affordable as possible here in Burien. I personally have enjoyed having a smaller landlord, so trying to restrict possibly the amount of properties large corporations are buying in our area.
Any council member have a question, or I can ask for thumbs up, or their thumbs up?
Mayor, if I may ask, if we, it would be helpful if we could have discussion outside before council puts us on this work plan, if we can, but there may be opportunities for us to help without
Sure.
bringing this back to council. So if it's possible that we could work with the deputy mayor and
Yeah, we'll just do a thumbs up to have you begin that discussion about what the idea is and what the direction would be to that, yeah. So thumbs up for exploring that with staff. Okay, great. Unanimous thumbs up. Anyone else? I have one that has been a previous agenda item from a few years ago, but it was but it sparked my interest again because it was introduced during COVID, kind of went by the wayside, but to bring it back after going and seeing this pilot project, I think, but I'd like to have staff look into opportunities to work on expanding broadband options for the city and what that would look like. Okay, thumbs for staff. We can talk more about that too, but exploring expanding broadband options in the city of Burien.
Could I add a potential friendly addition to that to include to just inform ourselves what it would look like to have a city-owned broadband?
Municipal broadband.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we could discuss
Yeah.
that idea, but yeah, for sure. And there's money, I mean, when we were during COVID, we funded with the Department of Commerce and their Office of Digital Equity, we funded a program with T-Mobile and Highline School District families, low-income families, to give free Wi-Fi to low-income families. So we've done work on this before. But I know there's money from the state for ideas around this. So there's thumbs up for that. So we'll begin those conversations. Okay, anyone else have anything to add?
Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
I just want to remind council that we've enjoyed having many conversations with council members about issues. We've corrected many without having to bring them back to council meetings. It was briefly mentioned during the last presentation that we have limited staff, and as we build the work plan that council has created, we then have items that remain on for years because we just don't have the capacity. But we would appreciate having the opportunity to first work with individual council members first to see if we could correct the issues before making them an official work plan item, because many times we are able to correct things, we're able to have research done. So if there are any other requests, we hope that we could work with council members privately first without building lists, without reprioritizing items on work plans. Thank you.
Just want to get the conversations going. Okay. Councilman Garcia?
Yeah, on that note, not necessarily an item to add, but just wanted to see if we can get an update on, as we're hearing about our ADU program and how we were pretty ahead of the curve on it. And maybe I missed it if it was already submitted, but if we could get the activity that we've seen on applications and built ADUs since we passed our own city ordinance a couple of years back. I think it'd be great for an update just to know how well it's been progressing.
Sure. If it's helpful, we could certainly connect to Councilmember Garcia directly with community development, and they could pull all that information together.
Perfect. Yep.
Thank you.
It works.